Hello everyone, Ember here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one I'm going to be taking a look at some upcoming Gholdengo decks from Japan. So basically Gholdengo EX actually releases, I think a week after recording this video. So it's very close, cutting it a bit tight this year for new deck profiles, but I did want to cover some Gholdengo lists because I do think it will have a pretty big impact on the game. So basically, for those of you who don't know what Gholdengo EX does, it's a 260 HP Stage 1 Metal type EX, which does have the ability Coin Bonus. It says once in your turn you may draw a card, which in of itself isn't terribly great, but of course if you have several Gholdengo out in play, then you'll be able to draw multiple cards. And additionally, if this Pokemon is in the active spot when you use this ability, you draw 2 cards instead of 1. So in theory, as long as you get at least 2 Gholdengo into play, and at least 1 switch, you'll be able to draw 4 cards a turn roughly. And switching between Gholdengos won't be a problem because the main attack only requires a single Metal Energy. Make It Rain does 50 damage for each basic energy card that you discard from your hand. And also what's really super interesting about Gholdengo is it doesn't specify Metal Energy, so as you'll see with a lot of these lists, basically most of these are actually playing different energy, not just metal, so they're playing like Psychic or Water, so something to bear in mind if we ever get more specific energy support in the future, something like Fire Crystal reprinted or something. So yeah, basically there is one more major point to make, which is that Earthen Vessel, which is, I think, a very important card for this deck. None of these lists actually feature this card, Earthen Vessel, because Japan does not yet have Ancient and the Future mini sets. I think they're called Ancient Roar and Future Flash, which I reviewed recently on the channel. But basically Japan has Raging Surf, which has Gholdengo in it, but they don't have Ancient Roar and Future Flash. So it's a bit weird, but basically they just don't have this card yet, and when we get this card we'll have all of it at once. But this card is still pretty easy to implement as a 4-of in most of these lists, and there's several instances where it's pretty obvious where this would slot in. So yeah, just something important to bear in mind as we move into the deck lists. So first up is we've got a pretty standard turbo build, running the infamous new Jirachi, which is going to prevent Sableye from placing damage counters on your bench Pokemon, which is pretty important because Gimmighoul has the measly HP of 50, which is a bit trash. This deck is also playing some fairly straightforward items. It's going for more turbo build. Of course, it's playing 4 superior energy retrieval and 3 of the normal energy retrieval. I'd probably eat into these counts in favor of Earthen Vessel maybe, or even in favor of like some basic energy removed from the deck and maybe some like Pokestops removed, because Pokestop does feel a little bit risky, because if you're sending energy to the discard pile with Pokestop, then you're not recovering. Then you're gonna have to spend resources to recover it. Without, it's better to discard energy from hand with the attack, I should say, as opposed to, risking losing it with a Pokestop. But yeah, I do think a turbo build has a lot of potential in standard right now. It's definitely can outpace most of the top decks, but be interesting to see if this ends up being the best variant or not. Personally, not a one that I'm super interested in playing, but still pretty cool nonetheless. Next up though is we have a super cool build featuring Palkia V-Star, which is very strange, but basically it's just going to be based on the fact that Gholdengo can discard a bunch of water energy with its main attack, and then you can reattach those energies with V-Star Portal, and then hopefully attack with Palkia at some point in the game. I think that's what this deck is going for. You could also use Palkia to charge up the water energy to something like Radiant Greninja if you really wanted to use like a Moonlight Shuriken to finish off 2 Pokemon, because of course sometimes Gholdengo won't be able to reach those when it cares, so you might have to, finish something off in the late game with Greninja. So super cool idea to have, really. There's also stuff like Rigid Band, which doesn't really see a lot of play. It says there's stage 1 Pokemon take 30 less damage from attacks. Kind of interesting because Gholdengo only has 260 HP. I know, only 260 still feels weird to say, but it is kind of on the low side, so having something like Rigid Band does make a decent amount of sense. But yeah, I think these kind of water builds will become less popular once Japan has Earthen Vessel, because it's just a bit better, really, in my opinion, but still a really cool idea, and I think there's at least one more Palkia variant to look at today. Next up, though, is going to be a Scizor revaroom variant, using revaroom to discard a Metal Energy, drop to 6, and then Scizor as a decent single prize attacker. Really strong card. I don't think it's been as powerful maybe as people thought it would be, but still interesting to see nonetheless. This list also features 2 copies of Lady, which is, I think, questionable at best. because like Lady is obviously the search your deck for 4 basic energy, which honestly I think this will just get swapped out for Earthen Vessel again. I don't think this card is very strong. At the same time though, if you're using Gholdengo as like your main draw engine, then maybe Lady's okay because you don't need to like draw many cards because you already have revaroom anyway. But yeah, I'm not super sold on Lady, but still interesting inclusion nonetheless. Also note that a lot of these lists are actually playing Cross Switcher because it allows you to not only gust, but also take advantage of the fact that you can promote another Gholdengo and use the ability twice effectively. So that's why Cross Switcher is often better than Boss's Orders in these lists. So if you're a fan of Cross Switcher, then this would be definitely be like the deck for you, basically. But interesting to see. Also more copies of Worker and Avery again. I guess that's interesting, but yeah, overall I think this variant is pretty cool. It's obviously got a bench space problem, and you need to manage which basics you bench and if your opponent boss KOs the right ones, but still interesting list nonetheless, and I'm looking forward to kind of trying this one out. Next up though is we have a bit of a strange one. There's like a lot going on with this list. It's basically playing the Hisuian basculegion, which allows you to shuffle all your basic energy from your discard pile back into your deck and do 20 damage for each one, which is pretty good to be honest, as like a massive late game finisher, and you are discarding a lot of energy with Gholdengo. It also removes some of the pressure to constantly remove the energy from the discard pile with stuff like Superior Energy Retrieval, which I do appreciate. Playing stuff like Psychic Energy and Fog Crystal does make sense. I definitely think these are cuttable though for the Earthen Vessels. But basically, Fog Crystal allows you to not only find a basic Psychic Energy to discard, but it can also be used to find Gimme Ghouls, so that's kind of like why it's in the deck. Still interesting nonetheless. Also 1-1 line of barrel. Bit sketch. I don't like running 1-1 line, even if you were playing something like Hisuian Heavy Ball, which this list isn't actually playing, which is interesting as well. So yeah, I would try and make room for Hisuian Heavy Ball in this list. It's playing a lot of different basics, and I'd worry that they'd get prized, but interesting list nonetheless. Next up though is we actually have a Gallade variant, so making use of that courier draw power, but also making use of Gallade because often Gimme Ghoul might struggle a bit for draw supporters because Path to the Peak is very disruptive, and it's also why like high counter Pokestop I think are really relevant in this deck. This list isn't actually playing Pokestop though, it's playing Artisan to help you set up rolls and stuff, but nice to see that regardless. Also, you could, in theory, attack with Gallade if you really wanted to, but takes 3 energy, so probably not a good option. This list is actually also playing the Spiritomb to deal with Mew, which is interesting, I think, because like I don't think Mew's like super strong over in Japan right now, but interesting nonetheless. Nice to see. Overall, I'm a bit bored of like these Gallade courier lists. I'm not a super big fan of this engine. It's okay. I enjoy it from time to time, but right now it's definitely not my cup of tea. But if this is up your alley, then hopefully this is the list for you. Next up, though, is we have a Dialga V-Star variant, which is not a sentence I thought I'd be saying anytime soon, but here we are, Dialga V-Star, of course, with the Star Kronos attack. There are very few ways to actually charge up Dialga V-Star in the game outside of stuff like the Magen Zone, but we do have the Shining Arcana Gardevoir if you really want to make use of it. My only theory with this list is that you kind of basically thin out your deck, and then you send all the energy to the discard pile before using stuff like Energy Recycler and Super Rod, and then basically swing in there with Gardevoir to accelerate all the meta energy that you need to your Dialga. At least I think that's what this deck is trying to do. It's a bit confusing, there's a lot going on here. I'm not sure I appreciate this list that much. Like the single prization is cute just to deal with stuff like the Aegislash, which is probably quite popular over in Japan. There's also my low tech to ensure you never get Ionode, which is quite funny. But yeah, the 1-1 line's a bit sketch. Like the Dialga line's also a 1-1 line. Yeah, I'm not like the biggest fan of this list. There's a lot going on, but yeah, it's interesting at the very least. Next up though is we do have a Gholdengo Luxray deck. So if you actually don't remember what this Luxray does, I'm not going to hold it against you because it's a very niche card from Crown Zenith that basically says if you start the game with it in your hand, you can put it face down as your basic. So it essentially becomes 160 HP basic with 0 retreat, which is already pretty good. Then its main attack for single colors does 50 damage, and you can search your deck for up to 2 trainer cards, which is of course pretty good because it means you can find stuff like the Gutsy Pickaxe, as well as Fog Crystal, your Pokeballs, or your Energy Retrievals. So overall, a pretty cool starter because you're only playing 6 other basics, so that is decent odds actually of starting with it. What's like a 4 out of yeah, 4 out of 10 chance really, but yeah, it's interesting nonetheless. I don't think this is my cup of tea again. You know, it's a bit risky and definitely not as consistent as some of the other variants, but yeah, still pretty interesting nonetheless. Again, playing Fog Crystal and Psych Energy, which I would definitely cut for Earthen Vessel. And then next up is we have one more Palkia variant to take a look at, this time playing a 2-2 line of Palkia, so a bit more beefy and more of a focus on Palkia itself. But this list is also playing a 2-2 line of Togekiss. So if you don't know what this Togekiss does, it came around in the set of Seeding Flames, and basically at the end of your turn allows you to draw until you have 8 cards in your hand. And why this is really good with Gholdengo is because more often than not, you'll be filling your hand with basic energies to hopefully discard them and take a massive KO. Even if you can rebuild your hand size with the ability and price cards, you know, having something like Togekiss is basically just a major help. It also means you can lean more into stuff like Ultra Ball more frequently, which I really like about this deck, and Superior Energy Retrieval, of course, discarding cards in order to use the effect. So yeah. Also, this list is playing Pyukumuku, so it automatically gets a pass in my books. Playing 3 different Psych Energy is a bit sketch. I know you can get Togepi and Pumpkaboo with Fog Crystal, but yeah, it's a bit sketch, but I do kind of like this list a lot. I think it's really cool. But yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about Gholdengo down below. And yeah, thank you for watching.